Hey, everybody, welcome to Fictionology. This is Gideon, and if you listen very carefully, you can hear the total absence of Bardicans. That's right, no Bardicans in this episode. I am flying solo, the training wheels are off. It's just you and me. And I'm excited because that means I get to freestyle in my debut episode about what is, in all probability, my all time favorite book. Like many of you, I was a voracious reader growing up and still am. And most of the books I've read over the years are fiction. We live nonfiction. So for me personally, fiction, fantasy, science fiction, they've been escapes. It's great to have an escape as quality. And I think that there are a lot of valuable insights and lessons about life and obviously sheer entertainment value to be had from fiction. And the best books I've ever read, I'm able to go back to and rewatch. Kind of like the best movies, or excuse me, reread, kind of like the best movies I've ever watched. You're able to go back and watch it again. And, in many cases, the entertainment value is exactly the same. Nothing is lost on repeat viewings or repeat readings. And in many cases, especially with a good book, um, you're able to find things that you hadn't noticed in previous reads. So books in many ways, good books, are gifts that keep on giving. And if the frequency with which you visit a story is reflective of, how precious that story is to you, then this book that I want to talk to you guys about is probably my favorite book because I've read it more often, many more times than pretty much every other book I've ever read or reread. And to the surprise of exactly nobody, I got to confess that this is a Star Wars book. And I know some of you may be tempted to kind of, raise your nose at that, because it's a Star Wars book, really. But, honestly, if you just give me a chance, I think I can make a compelling case in this video and in the subsequent videos that will comprise this series that Yoda, Dark Rendezvous, which is the name of this book, is something that's worth your time. It's definitely worth mine. And a compelling case, I think, can be made for its literary quality. A great book, in my opinion, has multiple components. There are many metrics by which you would grade a successful book. You think of things like premise, prose, the words, the combination of words that are used to tell the story, characterization. So are the characters believable? Are they relatable? Are they memorable, even if they're not relatable, right? Like some of the great villains, in fiction may not be eminently relatable, but they're memorable. What about the dialogue? What epiphanies or revelations are revealed in the exchanges between the characters? What about atmosphere? You know, I think that there's some great works out there, some great stories. Like I think of like Cormac McCarthy, who wrote The Road and Blood Meridian, both of which are great books. No Country for Old Men, also a great book. They're very moody and very heavy, and they're consistently that from start to finish. These are moody, dark books, and they're great. But I also think it's very rare and even more impressive when a book manages to have a diverse atmosphere. A book that makes you happy at some points, makes you sad in others, amuses you in places. In other places, you'll be distraught, you'll be optimistic, you'll be pessimistic. A great story which manages to effectively convey a variety of emotions and a variety of tones and a variety of moods. That's very, very, very rare and takes a deft hand, a very competent writer to pull that off. And this book, surprisingly, even though it has a Star Wars brand title on it, I think does it better than pretty much any book I've ever read. The book, again, is called Yoda, Dark Rendezvous. It was written by Sean Stewart. It was released in November 2004. Now, it's about 6 months before Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3, released in theaters, which was, I think, May 2005. And the story of the book itself The events of the book take place approximately 6 months before the events of Revenge of the Sith. So it's set during the Star Wars prequels. It's set during the Clone Wars conflict, towards like the last third or the last quarter of the conflict. As the title also suggests, Yoda is a central character, arguably the central character of the story, which is very, very interesting. Yoda is obviously a pop culture icon, one of the most popular and recognizable Star Wars characters, and really one of the most popular and recognizable characters in all of fiction. But Yoda is not a central character in most Star Wars stories. He's not the protagonist of the films. He's a supporting character. And likewise, with the surrounding Star Wars fiction, Yoda has been in a supportive role. And I think that is a wise creative decision. Too often, fan service compels storytellers and writers to put popular characters front and center, oftentimes when they don't need to be. Writers and storytellers and directors, whatever the medium is, film, novels, graphic novels, video games, whatever the medium is, a storyteller should do whatever they need to tell the best story. Sometimes that means putting popular characters in the front, and sometimes that means putting them in the back or putting them off to the side. And though there's plenty to critique about in the Star Wars franchise, Yoda is typically handled quite well. He's a very powerful character. He's the Gandalf, he's the Dumbledore, he's the powerful old wizard, who in many ways is a bit of a conflict buster because he's so powerful, so formidable, so experienced. Much of the conflict that the other characters run into, Yoda is a bit above that pay grade. So he has to be used sparingly in order to maintain narrative tension. So in Star Wars fiction, Yoda often appears in a supporting role, usually in a crucial supporting role, but then kind of fades into the background. This is, with one or two exceptions, this is the Yoda-centric story in all of Star Wars, and it's fantastic. The writer, Sean Stewart, is so skilled that he's able to take a character like Yoda, who is iconic, who is popular, who most fans have conceptions and very strong feelings about, and is able to put him into a story where his powers and his position are still very much tested. They're not an instant I win button. Yoda in the prequels, especially, who is not the lovable gnome of the original trilogy. He's much more of a sullen, terse character, an embodiment of the Jedi Order's institutions in the prequel films. Sean Stewart takes that Yoda, because again, this story, this book takes place during the prequels, and yet he's able to bridge that gap. You see in this story quite a bit of the Yoda that Yoda eventually becomes in the original trilogy, in The Empire Strikes Back in particular. The kind of playful trickster, the deceptively funny, deceptively wise figure, the enigma. You see that. So Stewart's able to straddle both these interpretations of the character and make it seamless. He also tells a very, very compelling, emotionally compelling story where Yoda struggles. That Yoda has disappointments and attachments and fears and anxieties and struggles and tribulations. For again, a character who is like Gandalf, who is like Dumbledore, who's the all-powerful good guy in the story he's in, that's a hell of a feat. Not every writer could pull that off. And yet he's able to do that. The other main character in this book, actually there are several, but the other pillar opposite Yoda is another character from the films, significantly less iconic. Some of you may not remember this character. It's Count Dooku, played by the late, great Sir Christopher Lee in the Star Wars films, specifically Attack of the Clones. Dooku, for those of you who don't remember, is the main villain, effectively, of Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And we're introduced to him as a former Jedi. He was a legendary Jedi Master who left the Order before the events of the film. And when we're introduced to him, we find out a couple of things. He was Qui-Gon Jinn's master, Liam Neeson's character in The Phantom Menace. And he was Yoda's former protege. Yoda was his Jedi Master. And the character was set up in a really compelling way in the film. He was very mysterious, very enigmatic. And Dooku himself was an interesting villainous contrast to what we've seen before. In Star Wars, of course, the arch-villain is Emperor Palpatine. You have Darth Vader, Darth Maul, who's like a demonic ninja, and then Dooku is this very sophisticated elder statesman. He doesn't have the tattoos, the horns, the red, yellow eyes, the deformed face. He's not a 7-foot tall mechanical monstrosity. And yet he conveys this menace and confidence, again, played by Christopher Lee, who is Saruman in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Count Dracula and the Hammer horror films. Legendary actor. He's been in like every other Tim Burton movie ever produced. And he's introduced very late in the film. And we get a couple of critical scenes with him that really play up the mystique. And then at the end of the film, he reports to his true master, his new master, Darth Sidious, and it's revealed that he's a Sith Lord. So he's a former Jedi turned Sith. So he is also, in the narrative, he serves as a foreshadowing of what Anakin becomes in the next movie, Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin becomes Darth Vader. Dooku is very underutilized in the films. Again, he's introduced late in Episode 2. And then he's killed off relatively quickly in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, by Anakin, paving the way, kind of clearing the path for Anakin to replace him as the Emperor's new Sith apprentice. In the fiction between Episode 2 and Episode 3, so like Star Wars, The Clone Wars, in the TV show, in many comic books, in many books, Dooku is a pivotal character because he's one of the arch villains of the setting. He's essentially he is the Jefferson Davis of the Civil War that the Republic is going through, the Clone Wars being a civil war. Dooku is the figurehead of the Separatists, the people that want to break away from the Republic. And he's a very powerful, very skilled duelist, so he's a major villain in the setting. In most of his appearances, he's not utilized, I would argue, to full effectiveness. Many of the writers forego any sort of depth or nuance or ambiguity and make Dooku a bit of a mustache-twirling villain, which is a shame because there was potential for a lot more. This book does the opposite. Yoda Dark Rendezvous takes Dooku and Sean Stewart actualizes Dooku's potential, takes this disposable villain from the Star Wars prequels, films that are critically panned, that are hated by a significant portion of the fan base, though loved by an equally sizable portion of it, takes this disposable villain played by a legendary actor and really breathes life into the character. Dooku in this book is a great villain, but a great figure, a great character all the same. Multifaceted, multidimensional. He's powerful, he's intelligent, he's cunning, he's experienced, he's strategic, he's shrewd. And he's also lonely, insecure, jealous, sad, fearful, anxious, hypocritical, arrogant. In 300 or so pages, Sean Stewart manages to create a villain that I would argue is probably the most multi-dimensional, most compelling Sith Lord protagonist in Star Wars, and that includes Vader. That's how well written Dooku is in this book. He, like so many people, is complicated, and he's many different things all at once. What an accomplishment. And the relationship between Yoda and Dooku former master and apprentice. These two figures that had a paternal bond, Yoda being the father figure, Dooku being the gifted but wayward son. That relationship provides the foundation for this story. So the premise of Yoda Dark Rendezvous is, again, it's set in the last 6 months of the Clone Wars, and Yoda receives a secret message from Dooku, and Dooku claims that he's beginning to doubt the righteousness of his cause, the cause of the separatist movement, and he's basically regretting starting the Clone Wars or contributing to the start of the Clone Wars, and he's interested in negotiating a possible truce or a possible defection back to the Republic, back to the Jedi. Now, the Clone Wars have racked up a tremendous body count. Planets are burning. Hundreds of millions of people have died. So even though Dooku is a Sith Lord, as far as the Jedi know, and a traitor, there's the possibility he's sincere in his truce. And the Jedi gamble, we've got to take him as, we've got to look into this. We've got to treat this as a legitimate peace offer and look into this, because if it is sincere, we could end the war now. That is the Dark Rendezvous. That's the rendezvous, the meeting that the story builds up to between Yoda and Dooku, with the idea being under the guise of a possible truce. That's the broad premise of the book. The story itself is much more complicated than that. Yoda and Dooku are the characters that, in whose shadow all the other characters operate. They're the two big prominent characters that the story revolves around. But there are many viewpoint characters. There are many protagonists, such as there were. This is, again, is an ensemble book. And most of the ensemble is comprised of original characters that have never existed in a previous Star Wars story. Some of those are, you have 2 Jedi Masters, Jai Merrick, Max Leem, and 2 Jedi Padawans. They're Padawans. Jai Merrick's Padawan to Elizabeth Enwendung Esterhazy, a.k.a. Scout. That's her nickname. And Max Leem's Jedi Padawan, Wee Malro. So those 4 Jedi join Yoda on his journey to Dooku for, again, the Dark Rendezvous. Other major characters include Asajj Ventress, who's appeared in the Star Wars Clone Wars television series, both of them, as a major character. And Ventress has also appeared in some of the comics, and I think in a canon book called Dark Disciple. So she's kind of a prominent secondary character. Other characters, established characters like Obi-Wan and Anakin, Darth Sidious, Mace Windu, Padme Amidala, they also appear at critical junctures in the book. But Dooku, Yoda, Ventress, Jai Merrick, Max Leem, Wee Malro, and Scout, those are the main characters, the characters that the book spends the most amount of time with. All of them are incredibly well written. Again, which is a staggering feat when you consider that at least half of them have never appeared in a previous work. So Sean Stewart has to introduce these brand new characters and give them compelling character arcs that will invest the reader into them. For the most part, he succeeds. It's pretty impressive. Also, I would be remiss to note that there are also 2 prominent droid characters, also original creations, Fidelis and Solus, 2 very similar droids that are even more stark in their differences. They're like funhouse distorted mirrors of each other. And they're as iconic as C-3PO and as R2-D2 and as like HK-47 if you've played the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic game. Just impeccably well-written characters. There's so much to talk about this book. It's not a perfect book by any stretch. And as we go deeper into the examination, you'll see that there are some I would call deficiencies, I guess. You know, like as an example, I don't think Stewart's interpretation of Obi-Wan or Anakin are especially memorable. It's not that they're bad per se; it's just that they're unremarkable compared to what he accomplishes with all the other characters in the book. So in comparison, they seem deficient, but that's a pretty high standard. To some people as well, you may not like the fact that it's the prequel of a prequel. It's set during the prequel trilogy. You know what happens to Yoda. Most of you know what happens to Dooku if you've seen the prequels. So there are many foregone conclusions in this book. Now, for someone like me, that's not a problem. A well written story is a well written story, even if I know the ultimate outcome. Now, it's more of a challenge, I think, of course, because there's a bit of suspense that's lost. So you have to up the ante in other regards, but this book does that. So it's just incredibly well written. Now, the book itself is no longer canon. It was canon at the time it was written. It was, a canon for those of you who, may not be familiar with the term, an official story. In 2004, when this book was published, it was considered an official part of the timeline. In other words, in the Star Wars universe, this story actually factually happened. It was treated as, as much a legitimate story as any other. When Disney purchased Star Wars back in 2012, they rebooted the continuity 2 years later, 2014. They essentially wiped the continuity clean to make way for the sequel trilogy and a new continuity that would be, at least in theory, more regulated, more cohesive. The jury's still out on whether or not they've succeeded in that regard because continuities are pretty hard to manage. So this story is technically decanonized. It is no longer canon. It's still published, it's still sold at bookstores, but it's sold under the Legends banner, which most Star Wars books are. Legends being the Star Wars version of an alternate universe, a tall tale, a myth. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, maybe it did happen, but not quite as described. There's ambiguity as to whether or not it happened in the Star Wars universe. But that has no effect, for my purpose, on the book's quality. To some people, they wouldn't waste their time reading it. Well, if it's basically not technically canon, not technically true, I don't want to waste my time with it. Fair enough. But I would argue that the literary quality of a story is not diminished based on whether or not, executives at Disney consider it true to the story, especially when it was considered true at the time of its publication. The book is comprised of 12 chapters. So again, it's about 300 pages or so paperback, maybe more. I read the Kindle version, and the chapters are fairly long. They comprise multiple scenes, multiple viewpoint characters. So it's not, it's not like a small young adult novel or anything like that, or a novella. It's a full length standard novel. It's just the chapters are a bit chunkier. My plan is to discuss with you each chapter in its own episode. I want to talk about, like give you recaps of the scenes, talk about, important tidbits, good, bad, and otherwise, but memorable parts of those chapters, specific excerpts, because one of the things that stands out to me about this book compared to pretty much any other I've ever read is the prose. The prose is just incredible. The combination of words that Stewart uses to tell the story is remarkable. Some writers are very dry in their prose. They're very mechanical. It's like reading an instruction manual. There's no poetry to it. There's no rhythm. It may, be quite robust in its vocabulary, but there's nothing engaging about it. There's nothing emotionally compelling. Other stories are, you know, too abrupt. They tell you nothing. It's very basic sentences, not sophisticated at all. It doesn't tell you much by way of anything. It's just bare bones, skeletal, almost like stage directions in a screenplay. This book doesn't do that. Stewart manages to pack and load so much emotion and so much nuance. He gets so much economy out of his words. It's impressive. It really is. And I look forward to sharing with you. I mean, the book is just littered with just these memorable phrases, these memorable excerpts, and I look forward to sharing all that with you. It's impressive. So that's really all I had to say. I wanted to introduce the book, explain what the plan is. Like I said, the plan is 12 chapters, so 12 episodes, and perhaps an additional one to kind of recap everything. So between the intro video, the 12 chapters, and a possible recap chapter, you're looking at potentially a series of 14 episodes. I'm really excited about diving into it with you. I'm a nerd on any on any good day, on any given day, about a variety of subjects, but I can go ham on Yoda Dark Rendezvous. And I am fairly convinced that for those fellow nerds out there, or for those voracious readers out there, that I will have made a compelling case at the end of the series as to why you should pick up the book or listen to the audiobook. I'm quite confident. No one's more surprised than me that of all the books I've ever read, Star Wars, non-Star Wars, that this one, which is again an obscure title, it's not a high-profile book even among Star Wars publications. It's not Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy. It's not Matt Stover's Revenge of the Sith novelization. It's not James Luceno's Darth Plagueis novel. It's not Drew Karpyshyn's Revan novel. This is a relatively obscure title, even among Star Wars fans. But damn, it's good. Damn, it's good. So, I'm hyped. I hope you are too, hearing how hyped I am. And I look forward to diving into it with you guys, very soon, starting with chapter 1. And as usual, Bardicans, who isn't here right now, we appreciate any support, feedback. Please be sure, if you don't mind, like and subscribe. That kind of validation is something we value, whether you agree with us or not. And hopefully, as we go through this, if you disagree with my interpretation of the prose or the characters or whatnot, hopefully we can have like a dialogue about it. That'd be fun. It's always fun to talk about this sort of thing. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Again, we'll return with chapter 1 of Yoda Dark Rendezvous very soon. And until then, I guess this is Gideon out.